Once upon a time, a couple of us engineers thought up a way to take a picture of a fast-moving web of flat material like cloth or plastic or metals so that it could be captured by a computer and then inspected by the computer in real time while the stuff is being made. At the time, 100% inspections had to be done manually after the manufacturing was done. So they'd make a roll of this stuff and take it over into a side somewhere and put it on a thing called a rewinder and then go through it and look manually at it. Or if they were using video, do it at really slow speeds. And it took a long time as it was expensive. Furthermore, the problem was that the entire roll had already been made. So if there was a problem with a printing head or a nozzle or a roller or something, it could have damaged the whole roll. And we actually got started in this because we had a customer that had a material they were making that often had this happen. So they would make an entire roll of this stuff and then go to take a look at it, discover it was bad, and it was worth about $20,000, and they had to throw it away, and the stuff wasn't recyclable, you couldn't burn it, and so they basically had to put it into a pit. And I visited their plant one time, and they had out and back this big pit with a whole bunch of these rolls of reject material, which would have been there until it got subducted into the ocean and disappeared. So the task we had was to try and design a system that would inspect this stuff while it was being made. And there were a lot of other markets other than just this one material, printing on textiles as they were being made, surface inspection of metals, things that were being coated, magnetic tape, which is built originally, it's made in wide webs that are then slit to narrower webs and then slit into tape or various widths for various applications. So there were a huge number of potential inspection applications. As you can imagine, there are several companies around the world that basically do nothing except make things that you can roll up. And these were large potential customers for us. And in some cases, there were legal requirements. For instance, pharmaceutical packaging and cigarette packages have to be 100% inspected for the readability of their print because there are safety issues involved. Now, there were pieces of equipment that you could do web inspection with, but they were fairly slow. There were systems, there were area systems that used just a regular video camera and took snapshots with a strobe as they moved along, and you'd get a sequence of pictures. But in order to look at those or even have the computer do the inspection, the whole thing was pretty slow. The more natural way to do inspection of webs is to use a line scan where you look at one line at a time across the web and then you move the web a little and then you do another line. And the speed of the scanning in the camera and the speed of the web tell you how far apart the lines are. And of course, if you don't want to do 100% inspection, you want those lines to be touching. The problem is that if you have a camera that has sort of the sensitivity of a single line scan element, it takes a lot of light to be able to have the thing run at any speed because the exposures are very short, maybe 1/10 of a millisecond or something. So the problem you get into is that if you stop the web with the light running, the light has to be so bright that in a lot of cases it can burn right through the web. So there are a lot of issues about the utility of these systems in real applications. And if you try and go much faster, then you can't get enough signal, and so the thing just doesn't work out. So what we did is we designed a camera and a system to go with it that allowed these things to run at higher speed. And furthermore, they allowed the scanning in the camera to be synchronized with the motion of the web so that if the web changed speed, the pictures still came out with the same number of lines per travel, which didn't happen with a single line scan. If it was free running and the web was free running and the speed changed, then the line spacing would change. So the camera that we designed and the system that went with it solved both of these problems of sensitivity and speed synchronization. And it turned out that it was patentable. I should mention that if you build these systems, there are other things that can be inspected besides webs, big flat things too, for instance. Things like float glass, which are sort of like a web, but the glass is made by floating it on mercury to get it flat while it cools. So you could inspect glass as it's being made. You can also inspect things that are just large and flat, like the glass sheets that are used to make the displays that all of you are probably looking at. And in fact, now when displays are made, there are probably half a dozen inspections along the way. Everything from the bare glass itself to make sure that it will process properly, all the way through to looking for bad pixels once the display screen is actually made. So to summarize, we invented a technique to synchronize the camera with the web motion and to take images in a method that allowed it to go into a computer for real-time inspection. Then we actually designed and built a camera that would do this. It used a commercially available charge-coupled device run in a special mode that's called time delay and integration. Those of you who are interested in the details can look that up. So here's a picture of the camera. It was roughly 2 by 2 by 6 inches. Then we built a little tabletop demo system that was about so big that had a timing belt like the ones that are used in cars to keep everything synchronized so the spark goes off at the right time. It was driven by a servo motor with a controller. And then we had on the back side of the belt, which is just flat, we had test patterns printed. So the camera was here looking down at the belt, and then the belt could be run at various speeds, and there was a device to lock the scanning of the camera to the belt motion, and then video would go into the computer and come out on the video display, and you'd see pictures coming up of the belt as it went back, and as it went, really only ran in one direction. As it went past, and you could change the speed, and it would keep doing it, and it all worked just fine. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the demo system anymore. It was years and years ago. So we filed our patent application once we were sure this was actually going to work, and then we went through all the gyrations that you normally go through to get a patent issued in the patent office, and I'll talk about that in another video sometime. So here's the patent drawing that shows the camera and the web system and all that. This shows what we patented, a system to generate real-time images of a high-speed web where the scanning is in synchronism with the camera, with the web motion. So we sold some cameras. That actually turned out not to be very hard, and we actually got a licensee, a systems company, who paid us money in order to license the patent so they could build systems with our cameras for their own applications, which, if I remember right, was metal inspection. Now we get to the plot. So our boss saw that this was going to be valuable, and he decided that he had to do something about that because, as with any company, the company owned the patent. The two inventors, myself and our chief engineer, got our $75 or whatever was out of it, but it was assigned to the company, and so if there was any money to be made, the company was going to make the money. And so our boss didn't like that. He wanted to have somewhere where he could make some money out of this. And of course, he wasn't even on the patent, but that didn't bother him. So he called a meeting to discuss how to get around the patent so he could start his own company and do this thing that we had invented, but to do it some way that got around the patent itself. So here are all the people involved and how they relate to each other. First, I want to point out there are actually two companies involved, and the black line shows who worked for each company. There's a subsidiary, which is a small electronics company, and then the parent, which is a systems company that uses products made by the subsidiary. since these companies are organized in the sort of British manner, the financial organizations are separate from the rest of the organization. And so the finance people in each of these companies don't report to the company management. They report separately to financial controller back at the holding company, which is at the top of the screen, as you'll see. So here's me. I'm the sales manager for the subsidiary. And we had a design manager and a marketing manager and a production manager, as well as a couple of other people, all of whom reported to the general manager. Now, this wasn't a separate company, it was really a division, and so there was no president or anything, just a general manager. So the general manager reported to a product manager back at the parent company. The product manager reported to a division vice president, and the division vice president reported to the president and CEO, who reported to a person back at the holding company. And the president and CEO of the parent company had reporting to him a security officer. He also had a lot of other people reporting to him, like other division VPs, but the one that's important to this story is the security officer. Now, to the left of the line is the controller of the subsidiary, who reported to the CFO back at the parent company, who in turn reported to a financial guy back at the holding company. Now, I had reporting to me several people, including an account executive who had originally worked at the parent company and decided that he had more interest in working for us selling our products rather than those of the parent company. Now, the thing that's different about this is the account executive was married to a woman who was the daughter of the CEO of the parent. The importance of this will be obvious once I start to tell the story. Now, he figured that I would want to come along with him and work in this new company, and so would the engineer and a few other people that reported to him. And so he called this meeting to try and figure out how to get around the patent. Okay, so when I heard about this meeting, I thought, this is not going to fly. I really didn't get along with my boss all that well anyway. So I called the guy who worked for me, who was an account executive. And if you remember, he was married to a woman who's the daughter of the CEO of our parent company. And so I called him, and he told his wife, and she called her dad and explained what was going to happen. And I had to do it this way because there were two steps between my boss and the CEO back at the parent company, and I didn't know if any of the people in the middle were involved in this, so I basically had to go around the chain of command to report this. So when I reported that we were going to have this meeting, it was still a week away. The next day, the corporate security head got a hold of me and asked me to go to the meeting as a representative of the parent company and report back what happened. I got him to fax me a note authorizing this to happen. I thought that would be wise. And then a couple of days later, I got a call from a detective agency. They said they wanted to wire me and then that they were going to park across the street from the building where we held the meeting and record what happened at the meeting. Well, they went to the building, and where they were going to do their recording, discovered that this building was built for security for electronics companies and financial companies and such. And the windows were coated with a conductive coating that blocked the radio signals from coming out from the conference rooms. There were a lot of windows, but you couldn't actually record through them. And so they decided I was going to wear a wire by carrying in a microcassette recorder. So it was a Saturday morning. We had our meeting. It was on the 10th floor of this building. I recorded the whole thing. The meeting ended up being about 3 hours or so long, and since you can't put 3 hours on a microcassette tape, I had made up a story, so when I went in there, I was wearing a jacket and acting like I was a little bit under the weather with the flu or something. So I'd excuse myself about every 40 minutes or so and go in the John and change the tape and then come back out. So I recorded the whole meeting. It was on, I don't know, 4 tapes if I remember right. We spent, 3, 4 hours going over the patents and working up a strategy. It wasn't really all that interesting, but the most interesting thing was the first thing that the GM, my boss, said. He said, and I quote, although I don't have the name of the CEO in here, "If the CEO knows about this meeting, I really have to hand it to him." And I still have that on the tape somewhere, except that I don't know where they are anymore. I have to add, I wasn't actually in any physical danger through all of this. None of these guys were actually any particular threat. It was a nerd meeting. So I told the security guy that I had the tapes. He had me dub them onto regular cassettes so that they could put them into their dictation machines and have a few people back there do the transcriptions. So they did the transcriptions, took a couple weeks. He sent them to me. I verified they were accurate. They went back to them. And then there was a little more delay. And one funny thing happened. This is the law of unintended consequences. When they started investigating my boss, because this was clearly dishonest, they wanted to look and see if there were any other problems. They discovered that he had taken a trip to Europe with his mistress and spent $30,000 of the company's money in Paris on her, including first-class airline fare and a week at a nice hotel. It turned out that while they were doing all this transcription and everything, that my boss scheduled another meeting, and so I went to that meeting and recorded it and did the tapes and sent them back, and they did the transcription stuff. And then nothing happened. And then a couple weeks later, one morning, the product manager, my boss's boss, the security officer, and the corporate CFO all showed up unannounced at our offices. So they disappeared into the GM's office and the controller's office for 4 hours. Now I should mention something. When I showed the organization chart, remember that the financial operation in this company was set separate from the management operations. The financial operations is basically set up to do continuous auditing of the operating company. And that meant that the financial officers for all the subsidiaries and everything had a fiducial responsibility to the parent company to keep track of what was going on and report any anomalies. Well, our controller was in the meetings and was going right along with the CEO, so the corporate CFO was just livid. And there was no way this guy was going to survive, our controller was going to survive these meetings. So they also visited the other people that were in the meetings. And when they were done, they escorted the GM and the controller from their offices out of the building, and we never saw them again. On the way out, the GM said to me, "Dave, you should have come to me. We could have worked something out." Sure. Then the product manager told me that I was temporarily in charge of the company. Afterwards, it worked out okay. After a couple of weeks, I got a raise and a bonus. A few months later, I was made the real head of the organization, although the subsidiary, although what I didn't know at the time was that both the parent company and its holding company were in the process of all going out of business. And so sort of 6 months after this happened, the doors closed permanently forever. But in the meantime, here I am standing in the offices. As you can see, I am completely in charge. And they paid me to hang around until the end, so I was the last one out the door. They let me keep my company car, a nice Crown Victoria, and the computer that I had, which was really quite expensive PC. I wanted to tell this story to show that engineers don't always just sit at desks and design things, whether it's hardware or software or systems. They get involved with a lot of stuff, and especially these days where a lot of the stuff is novel. A lot of work that goes on now ends up in patents and trade secrets. And I urge everyone to, if you're an engineer, to get familiar with the patent requirements. It turns out it's actually easier now than it used to be, and I'll talk about that in another video sometime. Some of my other experiences I'll also talk about in future episodes, some things that engineers do, and some things that happen sort of on the side, like the time that my rep and I got thrown out of the Astrodome. And in an upcoming episode, maybe the next one, I'll talk about my 4 years working in synthetic speech. In closing, I want to say thank you for watching this video. Please feel free to comment if you want to, if you got any suggestions, if you got any corrections, things that maybe I got wrong here that you know about. Please subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Oh, by the way, you may notice these surroundings the way they are. They're certainly close to what they were last time. It's taken so long to get to this video because I'm actually in the process of preparing to move. So next time the equipment will be roughly the same, but the location will be different. So see you all next time. Okay, Grandma, Grandpa, you can move. This is a movie.